I live in a downstairs flat in a small block surrounded by other small blocks. Some of my neighbors are very trashy and are always shouting and arguing. No exaggeration. The police must be called out at least once a week because one of the neighbors would cause a disturbance. Anyway, a few months ago, at about 10 at night, from the lounge, I could see my kitchen window, and something caught my eye. I got up and went to the window, and there was a man standing there with his hands up looking through. As I approached the window, he started to knock on it. He looked really rough, maybe like a junkie. I told him to go away, but he continued to just stand there staring. At this point, I was starting to feel a little uneasy, so I told him I was going to call the police. He kept smiling at me in a really creepy way. Then he just turned around and walked off without saying a word, like nothing ever happened. I think he lives somewhere near me, as I've seen him again. We have never spoken about his strange behavior that night. He still really gives me the creeps. I know he was probably just high on drugs. This happened a couple of summers ago. Typically, I place a large box fan in my window at night, both for the soothing noise and to maintain a cool temperature in my room. While I've always harbored a mild discomfort about the possibility of my neighbors catching a glimpse of me through my window, I never anticipated anything beyond an inadvertent glance while I slept. However, my perception of normalcy was shattered last night when I found myself in a disconcerting situation involving my peculiar neighbor. Upon seeing my neighbor through his illuminated window, he was gazing into my room with no shame at all. Initially, I dismissed it, attributing the unsettling image to a figment of my imagination, or perhaps an optical illusion. To my dismay, upon a second check, it became evident that my initial assumption was wrong. He was still there, unrelenting and not a mere bystander. His unbroken stare, coupled with a disconcerting smile, sent shivers down my spine. The oddities exhibited by our neighbors have always been a cause for concern. They would engage in peculiar activities such as watering the lawn during rainfall and displaying excessive smoking and drinking habits. They've consistently been an unsettling presence. This latest encounter, however, has taken their peculiar behavior to an entirely new level, leaving me deeply unnerved. Being only 14 years old, this unnerving experience has left me grappling with a sense of vulnerability. I find myself asking, what can or should I do to put an end to these unsettling encounters with my neighbors? While their oddity was always present, this recent incident has pushed me to seek advice on how to navigate this uncomfortable situation. So I must say, I acknowledge that I might be overthinking this scenario, but the discomfort it has caused is undeniable. While this experience may sound like a creepy story, I assure you it's not an embellishment. This encounter genuinely disturbed me despite having faced scarier situations in the past. Me and my girlfriend rented an apartment for a month. The area was secluded, and after dark, everybody would mind their own business. Neighbors would hardly talk to each other or even be outside in the evening. Our apartment was in a building with 4 floors, and each floor had a single apartment. All the apartments were very compact and built to be rented to students. The night we moved in, our taps ran out of water, so I went upstairs, hoping to borrow some from the people living upstairs. I realized that 2 out of the 4 apartments were vacant and locked. The apartment on the 4th floor was lit from the inside, so I decided to ring the bell. But to my disappointment, nobody answered. Over the next week, we used to hear the sound of someone whacking a rod, or some sort of metal on maybe the floor, or some other object. This would start late at night after 1:30 a.m. and continue for hours. Initially, we didn't care about it, but after some time, it got us intrigued. The sound was clearly from one of the apartments above us, but as I already mentioned, 2 of the 3 were vacant for sure, and the 3rd one seemed vacant, but was lit from the inside. I knocked on its door many times, but no one answered. The whacking sound was a daily occurrence, and on some very late nights, we could hear someone climbing the stairs. It seemed as if we were the only ones living in this building, especially during the day and until the very late nights. We made up theories to convince ourselves that it was nothing, but the pattern of the whacking was too irregular for it to be made by wind or something other than a person. It would start almost daily at around the same time. We asked people around, but didn't get any satisfactory answer. No one knew if anyone lived there. Towards the end of our stay, I saw a shady-looking man going upstairs during the day. I asked him if he was the owner of the apartments upstairs. He said he was, also including the one on the 4th floor. I asked him if anyone lived upstairs and also about the whacking sound. He told me no one did and that he's looking for tenants. He said that he had no idea about the sound. To my surprise, he then asked me, "So, for how long are you staying here?" 4 more days. We'll leave on the 30th of this month, I replied. He asked me if anyone else had rented the place for the next month, and I told him that I didn't know. So, the strangest part is that for the next 4 days, there was neither the whacking sound nor the sound of someone climbing up the stairs late at night. However, my girlfriend's internship got extended by 2 days, and we decided to stay there. And just as I had anticipated, the whacking sound resumed after the 30th, the day we were supposed to leave. I don't know what it was. I won't ever know, but I'm just happy that we got the heck out of that place without any consequences. It really scared me sometimes and feels weird thinking about it, even now. For 2 years, I lived in the capital city of a western estate. 2 days ago, I moved to a smaller town about 50 miles away to be closer to family and get out of the city. It's not Skid Row or San Fran yet, but there is a massive homeless problem in my old neighborhood. Lots of petty crime, meth labs, and tent camps. I would frequently walk past people passed out on the sidewalk, so when a neighbor in my small 8-unit building wanted to hang out one night, I jumped at the chance to go out and safely walk around with someone. So my neighbor Steve, I always thought that he was kind of cute, so when he knocked on my door one night, I decided, what the hell? I'm moving in less than 2 weeks and we hooked up. I also figured some of his weirdness had gone away since I'd known him for about a year or so. Steve was always kind of socially awkward. I could feel his eyes checking me out on the day I moved in last year. He commented on my skateboards, and another neighbor, Trent, was outside with Steve, drinking a beer and having cigarettes. They seemed to be friends. After a few days, I began to have a beer or two in a bowl with Steve on his 2nd floor landing that overlooked our alley parking. One day, after mooching too many cigarettes off of me, he told me my feet were cute. They certainly are not, and I'd known the guy for less than a week. I also had no intention of becoming involved with him because he was my neighbor. It really weirded me out. I actively avoided him for the rest of the year until a few weeks ago. I would just wave hello and stuff like that. So back to when he initially knocked on my door. We spent a few days hanging out, and he started to get stupidly clingy. Like, if we hung out on Monday night, he wouldn't leave until Tuesday afternoon for work, and then want to see me again after he got done. Fine, whatever. I was getting laid and leaving soon, so why not? One night, I ran out of smokes and wanted to pass by the corner store Trent worked at for more. He was always really pleasant to me, so when I saw him working, I bounded in without a thought and said, "Let's say hi, Trent is working." The atmosphere changed 100%, because right after saying that, Trent starts calling Steve a piece of shit, asking him why he dared him to come in the store. "Fuck you," he said. Steve was silent. Trent turns to me, wishes me a good night, and a warning. "Watch out for this one, Anna. He's a psycho." I thought it was just bad blood or something. Friends have falling outs all the time. On the way to the bar, Steve literally ignored everything I asked about Trent. I'm not gonna lie, I was a bit concerned after that. So I told him I could just hang out by myself if he didn't want to say or do anything. I didn't feel like sitting in silence with a weirdo. Honestly, I remember leaving the bar and him trying to grab or hold my hand, but that's it. I drink too much anyway sometimes. So the amount I had was smaller than my regular. I didn't trust this guy anymore. The next thing I remember is muttering to someone in bright lights. I'm not on medications, and then next it was in a dark hospital room with machines beeping. My face felt like it was on fire, so I searched around for my bag and pulled out my phone to see what the fuck was up. 2 black eyes and a huge swelling on one side of my face. I texted Steve to leave me alone after I saw he sent me a few messages. He apologized that he panicked and was sorry. Whatever, asshole, I thought as I fell asleep. I was discharged from the hospital later that morning. I got a lecture from a doctor about alcohol. Discharge papers saying I fell and got shoved out the door as the dirty, uninsured person I am. Over the next day or so, I got a lot of support. I told my family and local friends who didn't let me sit at home alone. I got help from friends and was literally throwing everything randomly in boxes and booking a moving truck. I moved later that week with the help of a friend since I still had an eye swollen shut. Another guy friend whose family owned a dojo and does mixed martial arts told me I got hit in the face by a person. "Who did this to you, Anna? What's their name?" he asked. I believe this too, and come to think about it, I had no scrapes or bruises anywhere else. I have back issues and would have felt pain in my spine if I fell. On moving day, about 4 days after I was discharged, apparently, Steve sat on his ledge watching the movers pack my stuff in the truck and watched someone load my car up. I didn't watch and purposefully didn't look at him. "Who is that guy watching us?" a mover asked my friend. She just told them that we had to get the fuck out, so I think that gave them some general ideas. Over the next few days of me moving stuff in my car and on my move truck day, he kept asking me how I was, and that he was sorry and just panicked a few more times. So before blocking his number, I told him I knew he did this to me or was at least partially responsible somehow. I've gotten injured many times in college from drinking too much, skating, biking, etc., and never had this injury before. He told me that he was getting pizza, and I just fell. I can't believe he thinks I'm that stupid. Did he really expect me to believe that? Okay, whatever, I told him. Then I went to urgent care since my hematoma was not improving and hurt like hell. I asked the doctor if I actually fell. She said no, it was highly unlikely, especially after I showed her pictures of the injuries from before they relatively healed. So who is to say? But I'll rather trust the experts than some weirdo who apparently wanted to sleep with me all year. I can imagine. I probably told him to fuck off or something, and he might have gotten mad. I can't really say, though, since I don't remember. Nobody would let me go over there alone over the weekend. I left Trent a note under his door, warning him about Steve, and sped the fuck out of that city. Nobody knows my address. Steve doesn't have a car, and I expect to never set foot in that neighborhood again. For now, I'm just healing and looking forward to new changes. And to answer the question of getting an RPE kit done at the hospital, I don't think they did. If they did, I'm sure they would have said something. As previously mentioned, the only physical wounds were on my eyes and face. No scrapes or bruises anywhere else. Also, if you're wondering, I used to live in Denver. Stay safe out there and always trust your intuition. When I was younger, my family and I lived on a ranch. We spent most of our time there. My brother and I were taught at home by our aunt, who lived in a small building on the edge of the ranch, while we lived in the main house. Sometimes she would come over in the morning to teach us basic math and English. My brother and I had a simple dream. We wanted to work on the ranch as stable hands. We didn't want regular jobs, so we didn't worry about getting qualifications or going to university. Our life was peaceful, with no close neighbors. The nearest ones were about 3 miles away. However, we knew them well. They were an elderly couple that we would visit a few times a year. Sadly, they're not here anymore. This particular event happened when I was 19 years old. I am 26 now. I think my brother was out with his friends, and my mom and dad had gone out for the evening. My aunt was in her little house, and when she wasn't in the main house, we didn't disturb her. It was a rule we learned from a young age. If you needed aunt, you just gave her a call. I'd only been home alone for about 30 minutes. As I mentioned earlier, my mom and dad had gone out for dinner, which wasn't something they did very often. I wanted to go knock on my aunt's door, but I thought it might be impolite. I guess we were taught to be that way from a young age. It sounds silly now, but back then I was afraid to knock on my own aunt's door. So I decided to call her to ask if I could come over because I felt scared. I was 19 years old, which isn't really young, but I was a shy and anxious girl. Being alone in this huge 7-bedroom house made me feel scared. Every little noise, like creaking floors and dripping water, made me very uneasy. I couldn't find any peace or relaxation, no matter how loud I turned up the TV in the front room. So I called her number and she answered almost right away. She knew it was me.
Emma, what's the matter?
You see, I didn't usually call her except for emergencies, especially after she finished homeschooling us. Once, when I was 9, my brother got really sick and started vomiting because of food poisoning. That was when Mom and Dad called Aunt to come and help. She helped us clean up all the vomit. I know it might sound tough like she's a caregiver, but my parents have very demanding jobs. That's how they can afford this ranch and the house. Now, back to the phone call. My aunt picked up and asked, "Emma, what's the matter?" "Nothing's wrong," I said. "Can I come over and see you?" I told her that I was feeling scared and alone. It was completely dark outside by then, and even though I had turned on almost every light in the house because of my fear, I was still frightened. We lived far from any street lights. Our place was surrounded by more than 100 acres of fields and land where animals grazed. When you looked out of the window, all you could see was darkness, except for the kitchen window, where you could see a faint light from my aunt's house, but usually those lights were so dim that you could hardly see them anyway. My aunt agreed and said,
Yes, of course. You can come over for a little while.
But she was getting ready to go to bed early because she used to wake up early to take care of the horses. I went to the kitchen door, took the key out of the lock, opened the door, and suddenly, I felt like my body and mind were swallowed by darkness. My imagination went wild, thinking about all the scary and terrible things, like ghosts, demons, and killers. My brain was a mess, but I partly blame it on my love for reading horror and true crime. It's not a good idea to tempt fate with things that excite you, but deep down, you never actually want to experience them. So I decided to leave every light on in the house, even though my parents would be very angry if they came back before I left my aunt's. The distance from my house's door to my aunt's was very short. Maybe just 30 or 40 seconds if you ran, but around 1 to 2 minutes if you walked. It was like a small part of an athletic track, so you can imagine. I stood at my house's doorway, looking at the lights in my aunt's house. Her window had the warm glow of her living room light. I didn't know if I should run or walk slowly. I was so scared that I started shaking. I turned around and closed the door firmly behind me, put the key in the keyhole and turned it, making sure it was properly locked. Then I turned around and sprinted the whole way to her front door. So I didn't even bother to knock, as I was really scared and almost sure someone was chasing me, but no one was chasing me. I was just being overly anxious and a little scaredy cat. I remember my aunt mentioning that I came in without even knocking or telling her. I knew she might be annoyed, but she wasn't as strict as my mom and dad, so I knew she wouldn't scold me or hit me. In this case, I walked in, took off my shoes, and joined her in the front living room. The place where my aunt lived used to be an old barn. It was converted into a cozy living space with my parents' help. She had her own kitchen, bathroom, a separate living room, and everything she needed, including a spacious bedroom. She didn't want a big place, even though we offered her a spot in the main house. She valued her independence, and some of her friends still visited her, although we didn't really get along with them. So it was best for her to have her own space. My aunt enjoyed watching old TV shows from the 80s, and some were even black and white from the 60s and 70s. I thought most of them were quite dull, except for the James Bond movies from the 80s and 90s. They were pretty cool and interesting to watch. Unfortunately, she didn't play them often, but when she did, she'd invite me over because I liked those movies. I stayed at her place for a few hours until she kindly said it was time for her to go to bed. I was worried about the next few hours because my parents weren't coming home until 1 in the morning. It was only 10:30 and I practically begged her to let me stay. I tried to act like I was interested in the show she was watching, asking if I could stay and finish watching it, but she knew I was lying. She walked me to the back door, had me put on my shoes, and then let me out. As soon as she closed the door behind her, I ran in a state of panic. I reached the front door and unlocked it quickly. Later, I eventually fell asleep, even with all the lights on, but suddenly, the home phone rang loudly, right against my ear. It hurt, and the ringing was so loud that it startled me. Our home phone didn't have a caller ID to show who was calling, unlike a mobile phone. It was one of the oldest styles of home phones, but it was still cordless, so you could take it from the base station and walk around the house.
Emma, you need to go to your bedroom and lock the door. Don't turn on any of the lights and don't leave the house. Do you understand?
My aunt had never called like this, and I had no idea what to think. Not sure of what to ask her, I replied. What's the matter?
Emma, just listen to me and do what I say, please.
Previously, she had told me she was going to bed, and that was more than an hour and a half ago. So I was genuinely puzzled about why she had just called me, but I was also curious at the same time. So I opened my window, stuck my head out, and looked to the left. From there, I could see the south end of the house where the outbuilding was where my aunt lived. Just as I was about to close the window, I heard some noises. I quickly opened the window again and looked to my left, thinking it was my aunt, but it wasn't. It was a man dressed all in black, and I didn't recognize him. I gasped as he almost looked up at me. I could see he had now turned and was facing the side of the house where my window was. I quickly ducked and closed the curtains as quietly and slowly as I could. Then, I hurried to my bedroom door, opened it, and ran to my parents' room at the other end of the hallway. I opened their door and went to their front window. From there, I could see the front driveway, and I noticed 3 cars with their lights still on. The lights were shining on the property. 2 men were standing with the car doors open, and 1 was walking around the house. A few moments later, I heard the phone ringing again. I picked up the phone and answered right away, expecting to hear my aunt's voice, but there was silence after a few seconds. I was still listening, and then a man's voice said, "Your aunt is safe with us." I felt a chill run down my whole body. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I hung up and started screaming in my own bedroom. As I was screaming, I began to hear gunshots coming from the front driveway. My dad had arrived and started shooting at the guys. My aunt was found tied to a chair in her living room, and the men had done terrible things to her. She had called me when she saw them driving up the driveway. My dad had to defend our family, and he ended up killing one of the guys. He wasn't charged because it was considered self-defense. We had evidence that the other guys were armed because my dad always had a dash cam in the car. In the end, our family survived the night, and my dad's actions were deemed self-defense, but my aunt changed after that. She became more like a robot.